Members, the question is that the motion be agreed to. Karanga Aho, Andrew Little.
Tanakwe, Mr Speaker. Well, Mr Speaker, just when 4.4 million Kiwis have been asked what they stand for, I thought that at least the Deputy Prime Minister might stand up and tell us what he stood for. He stood there for half his speech with his hands in his pockets, and he didn't tell us a thing. He stood there, dare I say, whinging and moaning and carrying on. Because the truth is, New Zealanders don't want this change right now. There are thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of New Zealanders who want a banner that reflects and represents the mightiness that is New Zealand. But they know a bad thing when they see it, and they know bad times when they see it. That's right. And many of the delegates who turned up to the National Party conference this weekend, the weekend just gone, they know a bad thing when they see it too, which is when the Minister of Finance stood up to speak to that conference. They knew it was all bad too. And they weren't convinced by a Minister of Finance who stands up and says, don't worry, the electoral cycle will all take care of it, we're just okay for 2017. And the same applies to the flag. This is not a question of the electoral cycle. This is a question about our national identity, but it is a question about the time when New Zealanders are comfortable with change. And right now, this economy, because of this government's appalling economic mismanagement, is facing some of the most serious headwinds we've seen in a generation. Massive loss in the dairy price, massive loss of economic confidence. You walk up the main street of Whanganui and a quarter of the shop fronts are now empty. And people in Whanganui are concerned. And like many other regions around New Zealand, people are concerned about the immediate future of New Zealand. And they want the government to be there to help. They want the government to be there to help with housing, with social housing, to provide insulation for housing, to look after our kids, to make sure all those kids who are still going hungry in our schools might get a decent feed, whether for breakfast or lunch. What they don't want at these difficult times is a government that's already spent $8 million on a referendum process without a referendum being held yet, with another $17 million left to go, when there are greater priorities at stake. Right. And this government has just got it wrong. And if there was any further evidence required just about the level of enthusiasm that there is amongst the public of New Zealand about this, just look at these figures. So they had, what, 25 public meetings. These were the opportunities for mass public engagement. Hundreds of people expected to turn up. That's at each meeting, I mean, not across all of them. 739 people across all those meetings, an average of 29 per meeting. Do you know how many turned up in New Plymouth? Now, Maggie Barry's been to New Plymouth recently because I enjoyed sitting alongside her when we opened the iconic Lenlai Centre. But I wonder when she looked at it, the vast throng of people who turned up at that most iconic building, how many she realised turned up to the flag referendum? Eight people in New Plymouth. Now, the people of New Plymouth are good people. The people of New Plymouth are good people. They know iconic identity when they see it because they've now got it on their front doorstep. But they don't want a flag change. And that's why 8 people turning up to a meeting designed for several hundred tells you that people don't want a flag change. They don't want this referendum. And as you go up and down the country, 15 in some other place, 22 somewhere else, an average of 29 at each meeting. And what about the website submissions? And the Deputy Prime Minister said, well, we've had thousands of submissions, over 10,000 submissions, new designs of the flag. And we know what they look like because Parliament was treated to the spectacle of some of those flags last week. Sheep with a rainbow coming out of its bottom. And that pretty much sums up the National Party. That's the state they're in, a pack of sheep, and they want something flash and fancy. They won't deal with the methane issue in the agriculture sector. So it's left up to the flag designers amongst us to try and get a message to the National Party, will you please do something about the real issues. That's what that flag design represented. And then there were others, meat pies, jelly tips, jandals, kiwi, all the rest of it. And nothing wrong with those. And unfortunately, the Leader of the House is gone because I know that he will have a fascination with some of the designs. But this is where people are at. They don't take it seriously. And they don't take it seriously, Mr Speaker, because they've got other priorities. The rest of New Zealand, overwhelmingly, has other priorities at this difficult time in our history. And this is not the time when people are disengaged, when people are concerned, when people are anxious about unemployment, about the state of our economy, about what's happening to our farming sector, about what's happening in the regions. They don't need a $17 million referendum that asks the wrong question in the wrong order. If we're going to have a referendum, at least we should have turned it around and asked in the right order. But people have spoken loudly and clearly. They don't want the change right now. And that's not a poor reflection on New Zealanders, many of whom would like something different, many of whom would like a change. Many of them want a change to the national anthem too, because they're sick of singing a dirge every time we turn up to a festive occasion. Most of them sing along to the Australian national anthem before they sing along to our own. But they want something different. But they don't want it at a time, and they don't want this government that parades itself as the great financial managers and the great financial responsibility people of the generation, spending $17 million at a time when this country can ill afford it. We have never been under greater pressure financially. This economy has never been under greater pressure. And yet the Minister of Finance, the Deputy Prime Minister, he has the temerity to stand up in this House and sell us a dodgy bill of goods, a flag that they don't know, an identity they can't be clear about. And this is the issue that New Zealanders are clear about. If this government cared about New Zealanders, if this government actually started treating New Zealanders as if they matter, they'd see the writing on the wall, they'd see the sheep's bottoms and the rainbows, and they'd say, now's not the time. And they'd be honest with New Zealanders and say, it's time for a strategic withdrawal. We can come back to this another time. We will respect the wishes of New Zealand, and we will abandon the referendum, we will save the $17 million, and we will use it for something useful.
I call Jackie Dean.